Okay.
Welcome,
Okay.
everyone, to the regular program that's been very sporadic lately of the Center for Global Justice. We try to have these programs every Monday here at the Biblioteca. And today we have a very special guest, Vijay Prashad, who many of you probably know of, a very important geopolitical analyst that you can find many commentaries from him online. But anyway, today he's going to talk to us about the big shifts going on in the world, which of course we weren't very specific because everything's changing so fast. But anyway, Vijay, you can go ahead.
I mean, okay. Well, firstly, I wanted to say that I think some of you would have known Paki, and I think some of you would have known her. She was a fierce fighter for justice, was a member of Code Pink. She died last week. And I wanted to start with her memory because, um, it's like sometimes you feel like the more you make gains, the more backward you slip. And it feels disheartening sometimes, but I'm going to present something which I hope is the opposite of disheartening, because even as we look at the world today, and since January, young Donald Trump has started a war in Venezuela of a certain kind. A war in Cuba has been intensified. The war in Iran picked up. These were not new wars. The war against Venezuela starts really in 1999 when Chavez takes office. There's a coup against him in 2002. Obama, intensifies the pressure campaign in 2015 by really tightening up the sanctions. So the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro, it's not a new thing. It's intensified. It's insane. Haven't seen anything quite like this. The last time you will remember in this hemisphere of the Americas, something like this happening was, Panama, the seizure of Manuel Noriega, the middle of the night. Technology was a little different then. Panama, much smaller country than Venezuela, and Manuel Noriega, a pretty shifty character, unlike Nicolas Maduro, who was a bus driver, trade unionist, and so on. Didn't have Manuel Noriega's storied, curriculum vitae of having worked for the CIA, actually trafficked drugs for profit, and then thrown into the slammer in Florida. Nicolas Maduro, whom I know, I sent him a box of books the other day, know very well, definitely not a trafficker of drugs, definitely not agent of the CIA or anything. He's a loyal Chavista in the slammer in New York. The fight against Venezuela, not new. Of course, Cuba, you are all well aware. And Mark Ginsburg has a background which I know very well, that building with the statue of Che Guevara holding a child. You all know very well the struggle that Cuba has faced against the United States goes back to 1959. I mean, we can count the sanctions being tightened in 62, but in 59, it all begins. It's been a very long time. Yes, just as the kidnapping of Maduro was an intensification, certainly the cutting off of oil shipments to Cuba was a tightening of unbelievable proportions. Yeah, cruelty, extreme cruelty. But again, Kennedy greenlights an invasion of the country. So for God's sake, it's not that new, but it's certainly a tightening. Trump intensifying the campaign. Last year, the United States and Israel conducted a 12-day war against Iran, aerial bombardment of nuclear energy facilities last year. in July, 12-day war. The United States has been trying to overthrow the Islamic Republic since 1979. First, they got the Iraqis to invade in 1980. That lasted till 1988. Then there was a period of interregnum, as it were, period of waiting. And 2006, they began this whole thing about, nuclear weapons, and authorized Israel to go and bomb Hezbollah in 2006. Israel lost that war, had to turn tail and leave for the second time from Lebanon, and has vowed to take revenge ever since, which is really what Israel's bombardment of Lebanon has been. It has a character of revenge. 1 in 5 Lebanese people in the last month have been made refugees. 1 in 5, okay, have been made refugees. Imagine this in the United States, 300 million people. 1 in 5 is a lot of people. Okay, Lebanon, it's 5 million, but 1 million people have been made refugees. Okay, that's a lot of people. Have been out of their homes all the way south of the Litani River, but in fact, as my friends tell me, in fact, south of Beirut, it's become quite hazardous to be alive. So, yeah, it's true. Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, and then certainly, let's not forget, the genocide against the Palestinians continues. The attacks on the West Bank intensified. The Israelis on the rampage, wanting to get all their enemies cleared off. Remember that phrase jotted down presciently by Donald Rumsfeld after 9/11: sweep them all up. Sweep them all up. In other words, take advantage of the situation to get rid of all your adversaries. Israel is sweeping them all up, not just Iran, but the Palestinians, clearing out villages in the West Bank, sending in settlers and so on, and then bombarding the entire south of Lebanon up to Beirut, and in fact in Beirut. So yeah, all of that is happening, all of it, and it looks miserable. But then, in the middle of all this, I was in Cuba, and the Cuban leadership said, we're not going to back down. I asked the Cuban president directly, what's the scenario? Is the Central Committee going to give you up? No, they're not going to give me up, said Miguel Diaz-Canel. We are going to fight all the way, as much as we can. Tiny little island, 10 million people. We're going to fight all the way. Okay, that's Cuba. They don't have the ability to fight the United States. I mean, a full-scale bombardment of the type that the Palestinians have seen would really wreck Cuba beyond imagination. They could level Havana in a matter of hours. But that's just will. The Iranians have demonstrated something quite different. Very interesting development. The United States has made a categorical error picking a war with Iran. I mean, this is an error that will be written into history books. Firstly, up to yesterday, it was assumed that the Iranians had missiles with a 2,000-kilometer capacity. And those missiles have been plunging into Israel. They've been breaking the so-called Iron Dome, Golden Dome, whatever they want to call it. It's not working. Dimona was struck by a missile. That means that they've got through even the most sophisticated defenses of the nuclear facilities. They've been striking the Gulf Arab states where there are U.S. bases, effectively telling them that a U.S. base is not a shield, it's a target, makes you a target. The Iranians have apologized to those countries, said, look, I'm sorry, we didn't mean to hit you, but you have a U.S. base. It's come out now that Saudi Arabia has allowed its airports to be used by the U.S. First time since, before the 2003 Gulf War, when the Saudis told the U.S., you can't use our bases. You remember after 91, the issue of foreign bases in Saudi Arabia became an enormous issue. So the Iranians striking there. But yesterday, the Iranians hit Diego Garcia. Okay, they didn't hit the base, but they hit Diego Garcia. That means, and they have announced it now, their rockets don't just have a capacity of 2,000 kilometers. They have rockets, the capacity of missiles, the capacity of 4,000 kilometers. Berlin is 3,500 kilometers from Iran. Paris is within 3,000 kilometers. London. I mean, European cities are within range of these Iranian ballistic missiles. So the Iranians have demonstrated that they have a capacity that they have built up. Not clear yet where whether this all indigenous technology or they got help from the North Koreans. In a sense, it doesn't matter. Fact of the matter is they have very sophisticated missile capacity. They are sitting on thousands of boats, small cigarette boats, speed boats that are in underground tunnels. They haven't surfaced them yet. Those would hazard shipping. They've shut down the Strait of Hormuz, not for all ships, only ships that are unwilling to, that are coming from countries that are pro the attack on Iran. I mean, it's very clear. The foreign ministry said the Strait of Hormuz is open, but not for everybody. You be careful if you carry oil for a U.S. oil company. Be careful for that because we'll fire at you. The United States military or Navy can't afford actually to go into the Straits of Hormuz and to police the area. I mean, it's all bravado. And the reason is most U.S. naval destroyers, frigates, and so on are single-hulled ships. Most oil tankers are double-hulled. That means if an oil tanker is hit, one hull is breached, there's a second hull. Most U.S. Navy ships are single-hulled. This is a problem. I mean, it was easy for the U.S. to sink the ceremonial Iranian ship that left the waters, that was in the waters of Sri Lanka when it was sunk and half the crew died just a few weeks ago. It's a single-hulled ship. Most warships have one hull because you don't want them too heavy. You want them to be light so they move fast in the water and can have evasive action and so on. An oil tanker doesn't need to move fast as such. It's got to protect the oil. So they have two hulls. They're much heavier. They sit heavier in the water. The U.S. Navy can't go and put destroyers in the Straits of Hormuz. The Iranians will sink them. And that's a bad sign. Imagine Trump having to stand beside a photograph of USS something or the other, one of the presidents, Abraham Lincoln or whoever, sunk in the Strait of Hormuz. That would be a really bad look for the United States. The Iranians have the capacity to sink US warships. They can't afford to put them in there. Trump begging the Europeans, please help me. Europeans not interested. And here's where the story becomes interesting. The United States has made entreaties to the Iranians. For all Trump's bravado, saying that we're going to smash your energy sites and so on, he had to back off. And he had to say the talks are going well. The Iranians turn around and say there are no talks. We are not interested in talks. We don't want a ceasefire. The Iranians say we don't want a ceasefire. We're just getting going. Yeah, we're going to take civilian casualties, but we can really hit you hard. We can damage the world economy and you are to blame. What we want is a grand bargain. We want the United States to leave the bases that encircle Iran. We want the Israelis to withdraw from the settlements and so on. I mean, it's actually pretty insane what the Iranians are saying, okay? They are saying we want the Israelis to withdraw from southern Lebanon. I mean, they have put things on the table right now from a position of intense strength. I mean, they are not standing in weakness. This is very poorly reported in the Western press. The Iranians don't want to talk to the Americans right now. And you might ask, why not? Why don't they want a ceasefire? We don't want war. We want peace. But they don't want peace. What they want is a grand bargain. They want a real peace, not a false peace. They don't want a peace where the United States gets the opportunity to go and rearm, to rethink their military strategy, come back and hit Iran again. They don't want to give Israel a breathing room. They're going to keep striking. They'll take the hit on Tehran and other cities. But that's what they have said, that they want a grand bargain. They're not going to stop. And this is interesting. It actually puts pressure on other countries around the world to rethink this strategy of tailing the United States. I mean, we are going to see some major changes one way or the other. It could either completely backfire and Iran is leveled. Yeah, 100 million people, okay? We're not talking about, 2 million, 2.5 million Palestinians in Gaza, 100 million people. As it is, I was discussing, or rather arguing with an Israeli on a program some time back, and I said Israel has the most inefficient army. You're conducting a genocide, and your death toll is so low in Gaza, and you have no guts to enter Gaza on the ground because the resistance will hit you hard. Every time you send in tanks, the resistance fires at them and you leave. You go back to your so-called yellow line. Yeah, you're not actually prepared to come and occupy Gaza. You're too scared of doing it. Yeah, and you're too scared now of public opinion to have killed 1 million people. Well, if you can't kill 1 million people in Gaza, how are you going to kill 100 million in Iran? Because you're going to have to kill a lot of those 100 million to subdue Iran. It's not possible. The United States is going to lose this war because they cannot subdue Iran. That's the point. Winning the war doesn't mean destroying Iran's military. Even that may not be possible. Even that may not be possible, short of somebody dropping a nuclear bomb on Iran. And that's going to end badly for the United States or Israel if they drop a nuclear bomb. That's politically horrible for them. They will never live it down. Imagine if Israel drops a nuclear bomb on an Iranian city. I mean, how is that going to look, in the future? It's the United States who dropped a nuclear bomb on Japan, and Israel drops a nuclear bomb in Iran. That's the company that they will have to keep forever. As it is, they are in pretty bad company, in terms of world opinion. After the genocide against the Palestinians, there is no winning in Iran. That's the point. The United States and Israel can only lose. And I want to have us start from that premise that, in fact, there's only one way this war is going to end, and that's with an Iranian victory. But what does this mean in the broader sense? You see, it's very clear already, and it was made even more clear when the new supreme leader was injured in a bombing strike. When he was injured in the bombing strike, he was taken out and taken to Russia, where he was treated in a Russian hospital in Moscow, under Putin's special guidance and so on. This actually sent a very interesting message, which is that the Russians know that Iran cannot be allowed to lose this war. That if Iran loses this war, it would be catastrophic for the Russians and the Chinese. The Russians already made a pretty bad strategic calculation when it came to Syria. They, in a sense, sat back and watched a former Al-Qaeda chief take Damascus, even though they had Russian aircraft sitting in Damascus airport. The Russian aircraft did not scramble, didn't go into the air, didn't even harass the Israelis when they crossed into Syrian airspace and bombed Damascus. They just sat on the ground. And then the Russians made a deal with this government, the government of Ahmad Sharra, saying we'll keep our base in Latakia. They cut a deal, and Assad was gone to Moscow. But you see what this deal did. What this deal meant was that Israel was able to overfly Syria to bomb Iran. It had no overfly rights beforehand. They would not have been able to send jet aircraft over Iran. And in fact, Israel violated Iraqi airspace. I'm told that there's a real debate in Iraq about the allowance of Israel to have air flight air rights over Iraq to attack Iran. See, and this is the final point I want to make on Iran, and then I'm going to shift for another short commentary. The final point on Iran. I mean, I know that typically one is uncomfortable talking about the role of religion in politics, but religion plays a role. Iran is a majority Shia country. The population in Iraq is majority Shia. The population in Bahrain is majority Shia. The population in the southern half of Lebanon is majority Shia. These are the main Shia areas in the Middle East. Um, India and Pakistan have some of the world's largest Shia populations. India, I believe, second largest Shia population in the world. But it's a little far from the battlefield, as it were. I mean, the supreme leader is not the highest marja of the 56 marjas in Shiism. There are 56 marjas. Marjas are examples. The word marja basically is like an example. In Shiism, 56 people are examples for the rest of the community. The highest marja was not Ali Khamenei, who died in the first day of the Israeli attack. He was not the number one marja, he was number two. The number one marja is Ali al-Sistani of Iraq in Qom. He is the number one marja, and he has condemned the Israeli-US attack on Iran. He has condemned it. But nobody has blown the whistle yet. In Iraq, for instance, there have only been mild attacks at US bases, very mild attacks at US bases. The Iraqi militias haven't moved yet. The Houthi militias, the Ansar Allah militias in Yemen haven't been firing yet. They are very quiet. In Bahrain, there was a huge demonstration in Manama, the capital of Bahrain. But the militias haven't moved yet. You see, if a whistle is blown, the Iranians have the capacity to move these people, to fire at US bases in Iraq, to in fact enter into the northern part of Iraq in Kurdistan and attack the big bases there. The Ansar Allah has already demonstrated it can fire missiles that reach Israel. It's already closed down the Eilat port, which is the Israeli port on the Red Sea. It's been shut down since the genocide, since the early months of 2024. And finally, in Bahrain, you can overthrow the emir. It almost happened during the Arab Spring. But the crackdown was vicious in Bahrain, vicious. Saudi troops entered Manama to fire at crowds with live fire. We don't know how many people died. It's absolute monarchy. So, you can have chaos in the Middle East, but that whistle has not been blown yet. And I think people in the CIA and so on know very well that the Iranians are waiting. They have thousands of cigarette boats sitting in underground tunnels. This demonstration of a 4,000-kilometer ballistic missile was, I think, a surprise to everybody. I don't think US intelligence knew about this. I think it was a surprise to everybody that they could fire and hit a target in Diego Garcia. Okay, it wasn't the base, but they hit the Chagos Islands. Incredible range. Okay, so that's there. It's unfinished. It's not over yet. The day that the Israelis and the United States attacked Iran, the very next day, Chinese aircraft were over the skies of Taipei in Taiwan, sending a message to Washington, D.C. that, they can walk into Taiwan any minute. That just be careful what you're doing in the world. Because this sort of activity with Iran, it gives us license to do whatever we want. And they flooded the skies of Taiwan. It was like a replica of what happened to Venezuela, except they didn't do anything on the ground. They just closed the airspace with their military aircraft. I think that message was received loud and clear in Langley, and certainly somebody took seriously that message in Washington. I don't know if Mr. Trump was made aware of it, but somebody took, because Mr. Trump might have fired a nuclear weapon at China if he'd heard about it. I don't know. But somebody took cognizance of that. The question that keeps coming is, why aren't the Chinese and Russians doing anything? I mean, Russia has indeed sent a ship which is going to dock in Matanzas with oil. The ship is fully armed with special forces people. This is unlike the ships that were leaving Venezuela, which the US could seize. If they try to seize this, there will be a Cuban Missile type crisis problem on the high seas of the Caribbean. The Chinese have sent enormous numbers of solar arrays, and now they've sent rice and wheat for, I think, 2 months worth on Chinese ships. It's not like they're doing nothing, they're doing something. What they're not doing is confronting the United States and its allies militarily. That's what they're not doing. They're doing other things. I mean, it's pretty clear that they are supplying the Iranians in this time. It's pretty clear that Iran is being resupplied by Russia and China. And also they built up stocks beforehand. But why don't the Chinese and Russians confront the US militarily? And this is a very good and stupid question, because they don't want us to enter into a cataclysmic war. I mean, the Chinese are extremely cautious. The last thing they want is to provoke the United States into doing something so stupid as putting mid-range nuclear missiles in Taiwan. I mean, that would be like the ultimate provocation. They don't want that. The Russians are already in the middle of a conflict in Ukraine. They don't want to get into a conflict with the West elsewhere, which is why I think they didn't scramble their jets in Syria. In 2015, they brought their fighters in there to defend the Assad government against various forces in 2015. But by 2025, embroiled in the war in Ukraine, they didn't want a second front, as it were. And so they stood down. They are not capable of militarily confronting the United States without it turning into some enormous and extremely dangerous war. This war with Iran is already beyond our imagination. I mean, they are firing enormous numbers of missiles around the Middle East. I mean, Qatar Airways has moved all its aircraft to be parked in Spain. The airports in the Gulf are all closed down. The prices of oil at 120 perhaps will go higher. If I had money earlier this year, I would have bought oil futures. But I, like an idiot, neither have money nor do I have the guts to borrow money from people and make these decisions. But it was obvious early on that the oil prices were going to skyrocket, because the United States was not going to take the negotiation with Iran seriously. Where does this leave us? It leaves us in a situation, increasingly polarized world between the United States and its few allies on one side and the rest of the world on the other. The United States somehow believing that warfare and information control are the only instruments it has to maintain its power over the world, having lost its power over science and technology, over raw materials, and increasingly over finance as well. It feels that it has to use its military power to assert itself. That's very clear. This is make America great on a global scale. And the rest of the world, which really doesn't want a war. The Iranians have said over and over again, they do not want a conflict. But they are a very proud people. They've never really been colonized. They have thousands of years of unbroken history, a lot like the Chinese. And they are extremely proud, and they will not allow themselves to experience, let's say, the period between 1953 and 1979, when the British imposed Shah of Iran was in power with his Sabak and so on. They're never going to allow that again. So they're going to fight tooth and nail. But nobody really wants a conflict. Right now, we are living in a world where the Israelis and the United States want conflict. The NATO powers dragged into this seem to also want conflict. They have a testosterone vision of the world. The rest of the world wants peace and development. You know, many of you are sitting in Mexico. Claudia Scheinbaum is not interested in going to war with anybody. She is interested in the fourth transformation, peace and development. In China, they are interested in the fourth transformation for China, their own kind of fourth transformation, peace and development. Place like India, right-wing government, completely crazy. Bulk of the people, they don't want war with anybody, peace and development. Most of the world. I have a study coming out on Africa this year called How the International Monetary Fund Suffocates Africa. Peace and development. Nobody wants austerity and war and things like that. But the United States government and the Israeli government seem hell-bent on it. And that's where we are. We are not in a situation where the US is triumphant and everybody's prone and has submitted. People will fight back, but they don't want to. They want something different. And that's where we are.
Thank you, Vijay. Let's see if we have some questions for Vijay. Anyone have questions? You need to.
Hello, you've certainly made a lot of observations, and I'm wondering, with the news that's on before us this morning, that the Iranian government and the United States government are talking, and that Trump is supposedly relaxing for a few days, what are your beliefs are being put on the table that might lead to the cessation of the conflict between Israel and the United States?
Okay, perfect. Well, it's a really good question. And it speaks to, in a sense, the two forms of media that are before us. So, number one, we have, in a way, a media in the West that is increasingly driven by what you might call Trump news. So, what Trump tweets in Truth Social shapes the news. So, Trump has been saying, we're talking, yeah. But the Iranians at the same time, Iranian foreign minister put on Twitter, owned by Elon Musk, so you don't even have to read Farsi. He wrote it in English. He said, we are not talking to the Americans right now. So it's interesting how some of the media will be out there saying there are talks. And because of the talks, see, Trump does the following. Trump says, I'm going to bomb your oil facilities in 48 hours if you don't do X, Y, Z. And then a few hours later, Trump says, okay, we're in talks now. So I'm going to suspend my threat and I'm going to get my way through talks. And Trump is going to win. Yeah. That's the modus operandi of Trump, it seems. He did this in Venezuela, where he started saying outlandish things. And I must say, the government of Venezuela was a little played by this. They didn't come in and put their own views forward. So it looks like what Trump was saying is actually what's happening. Trump world is one world, and that world gets reported in CNN as if it's what's actually happening. But it's actually only what Trump is saying. In this case, Trump is saying, I suspend my unilateral deadline. It's not a deadline agreed with anybody. He unilaterally said, you have 48 hours to do this, or I'll destroy your oil facilities. I don't know if you saw his Truth Social post. It's now increasingly filled with all caps, even more than before. Yeah, sometimes the whole message is in all caps. Yeah, I will do the following to you if you don't. Okay. CNN will report that as if talks are happening because Trump said, I'm suspending myself in unilateral deadline because there are talks happening. And so then all the Western media outlets say there are talks happening. So Trump has suspended his thing, relief. But the Iranians then say, wait a minute, there's no talks happening. He unilaterally made a statement, then he unilaterally withdrew from his threat. That's all in Trump's head. So CNN, in a way, it's like being Donald Trump, like the film Being John Malkovich. Whatever Donald Trump's reality is reported in the Western press as if it's actually what's happening. They don't really pay attention to what the Iranians are saying, or they think the Iranians are lying or whatever, because they are mendacious, bazari politicians or whatever, they're not to be trusted or something. But the Iranian foreign minister said, wait a minute, we're not talking to them. There are no talks going on right now. Yeah, obviously there are all kinds of back channel communications about this. There's always that happens in a time of warfare. Yeah, there'll be some question about something or the other. The Americans will want to reach the Iranians and say, listen, you just hit the Israeli nuclear facility. Okay? I mean, that's not on. Yeah, you can't. There'll be ways to pass mess, but that's not the same as talks. They are not sitting with for God's sake, before this bombing started, the Iranians and the US were in two different rooms. It was like a Muslim wedding. And the Omanis played the role of the sheikh, going back and forth from the two rooms. The man and woman weren't sitting in the same room and negotiating. In a Muslim wedding, it's basically it's a contract. You sign a contract. If we divorce, this is what we get. It's all written out legalistically. And the Qazi goes back and forth and negotiate. Omanis played that role. So I can't imagine during the conflict they're sitting in the same room. It's not happening. And nobody has come forward and said we are mediating these talks. So either they are happening super secretly, which is possible. I don't know if there's some super secret talks happening. If they are so super secret, it's hilarious that Trump just comes out and says, well, now we're talking. I don't believe it. Being Donald Trump should not be the media.
Greetings. This is a statement disguised as a question. Are you aware, or do you know and have a way of measuring the impact that your body of work in your output, both in books and on YouTube, is having in the United States among progressive people? And my answer to that question is you may not know how much of an impact you're having because your perspective gives folks on the American left a world internationalist perspective. So I guess there's a question there.
Well, firstly, what you said is a very kind thing to say, and I very much appreciate it. I will say that Fox News has its own views on this. And today they've released part one of a whole new investigation of links to what they call the Chinese Communist Party. And rather absurd, the whole thing, there are times when I wish I was being paid by a foreign power that would keep me in, with at least health insurance, which I don't have. And I hope sometimes that I could get some payout to take a holiday, which I'm never able to take. So yeah, I'm really grateful for what you said, because just about an hour before we started on, so there was this new story at Fox by a reporter who heads their investigative unit, who has claimed once again, this is the third Fox story, about a conspiracy that, Jody Evans, and we're all in some crazy conspiracy when in fact what we are is people who have a certain ideological view. And I suppose in a way it is a conspiracy. I should admit that. But we're all in a conspiracy. It's called humanity. We want to make a better world. And I mean, I'm always, whenever a reporter calls and says, will you answer a question? I always say to them, I'm happy to have the conversation. Not about, are you an agent of XYZ? But let's have a conversation about the war in Iran. Yeah, let's have that converse. Can we not have that converse? Let's stay with the fact. Why do you need to talk about who's an agent of whom? That's ridiculous. I'm almost 60 years old. I've been at this, as long as I've been at this, and quite literally, I'm putting it to you quite straightforwardly that I'm ready to sell myself to somebody for a little health insurance. So if you have any willing buyers, I can shill for them if they give me health insurance.
Vijay, thank you so much, as always, for your analysis, wide-ranging as I expected. You mentioned you were recently in Cuba. Were you there for the 21st, for the arrival of the shipment of aid and whatnot? And could you comment a little bit both on those activities, but also on what you learned from talking with Cuban comrades?
Yeah, so actually, I was there the week before. I went in as part of a delegation from the International People's Assembly. And we had actually planned, Mark, to go there in February. But because we were taking people from Asia and Africa as part of our delegation, Asia, Africa, Latin America, it was very hard to get flights, as you could imagine. I flew with Fred Mbembe, who is the president of the Socialist Party of Zambia, and he joined me from Lusaka, and I was in Johannesburg. We flew Air France, Johannesburg to Paris, and then Paris to Havana. And it was very expensive. So the delegation from Africa could be only Fred. And I mean, one of the problems with any convoy to Cuba is it ends up being largely from North America and Europe, because people can afford to go there for solidarity missions. So we were very keen to bring, delegates, political leaders from Africa and Asia. And so part of our mobilization was framed around that. And, when we were in Cuba, we met with the president, we met with the head of organization of the Communist Party, we met with the foreign minister, Bruno Rodriguez, we met with the head of the international department of the party, Emilio. We met with a number of people from the party and then from non-party groups. But, most of our work was to bring greetings from African, Asian, and Latin American political organizations, because International People's Assembly represents 400 political organizations. But, as you can well imagine, we can't be represented on something like a flotilla or a convoy, because, for instance, we represent the Tanzanian landless workers movement, MIWATA. Nobody can send even one person or even like a box of medicine. I mean, people are extremely poor. Within our orbit, we have the Workers and Peasants Party of Pakistan, or the Workers' Party of Bangladesh, the Communist Party of Sri Lanka. So you can imagine the problem of resources to get people to Cuba. So we came in a way to put our flag on the table and say, comrades, we are 100% with you. Yeah, we are 100% with you. And we met as I said, a range of people. I particularly wanted to go to visit Dr. Piloto at the Hospital of Neurology and Neuropathy, partly because I was, it's something that interests me a lot. The question of how they have been able to treat patients with epilepsy and brain tumors and also forms of mental distress. It's something that I'm personally very interested in and have a reason to be. And when you have blackouts, so in fact, even you're running on generators. People know that when you have a generator, the power fluctuates. You can't do brain surgery with fluctuating power. You can't enter somebody's brain. So there are patients sitting there, they can't be treated, and the backlog is enormous. There is no way actually to do a brain tumor surgery in Cuba right now. It's not possible. And patients are dying who had been on ventilators because again, you will know that with if there are great fluctuations of power which you can't control, ventilators, they just disconnect. They just can't manage. So I was very interested also in going there. So of our team, people did different things. I spent a lot of time, doing this kind of thing. Of course, meeting people from the Center Martin Luther King, from some academics and so on. And then we went to Venezuela, which was a different experience where the country is in a kind of trauma. I think people haven't really fully digested what has happened. And there's a lot of rumors and things that are going around. But I'll tell you, Mark, it's undigestible. It's undigestible. Like, how do you come to terms with the fact that one day you wake up in the morning, or if you were in Caracas, you were woken up at night by the noise, and you learn that the president was kidnapped? It's just surreal. It doesn't happen. It's utterly surreal. I mean, I've been in New York City with Maduro there, when he came to address the UN. It's not like he's not been to the United States, but to be taken in this way, the kind of indignity shown to the whole country. And I think that's what, in a way, convinced Donald Trump that Marie Corina Machado wasn't up to it. Because, like, how could she be placed now as president after this? He's going to have to blame her for this, saying she did it, and I mean, it's a mess.
Yeah. And coming up is the court appearance of Maduro and the first combatant on the 26th. And it'll be another travesty of justice if they continue the trial.
I mean, no disrespect to anybody, but I'm told the judge is 92 years old. He's not going to live to see a verdict. They are never going to allow him to return to. Nicholas will never return to Venezuela. They will never let him return. It's impossible.
Thank you. Hey, Vijay. We have this meeting on Sunday mornings. The ICSS is started in Berkeley. Now it's spread throughout wherever in the world. Speaker Sunday yesterday named Amaresh Mishra. You know him?
I don't know him personally, but I know of him.
Okay, that's all. I had never heard of it. Well, people, one after another on the group, praised him to the ends of how far he's been supporting the cause and his brilliant work to do that. And what the whole morning was saying, yes, not in so many words necessarily, but yes, communism here, communism there, yes, communism everywhere. So I have been saying it's been happening steadily. In fact, I've decided that Putin, who is accused of being in the KGB, did it because he was in support of maintaining the glorious Russian Revolution. The whole thing is about that the people know better than to give it up. They won a glorious victory and they will persist. And Putin is an aid to doing that, as well as throughout the world. Everybody's doing it. And I've been saying it. I insist that it's just happening everywhere. Regards. Thank you.
Norma, we are living in a very complicated period, and I mean, my own particular feeling is that having traveled to many of these places, like the Sahel region in Africa and so on, I would say the word may not be communism as much as sovereignty. That people are struggling to fight for their sovereignty. That's the first principle that they are trying to establish. They want, International Monetary Fund out of their hair. They want multinational corporations out. They want, foreign troops out of their land, and that's the beginning. And I think once they go there, it's interesting. Sovereignty doesn't mean autarky. It doesn't necessarily mean we don't want to deal with foreigners. Like in the Sahel, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have come together to create the Alliance of Sahel states, regionalism, sovereignty plus regionalism. And then they are saying, well, we're interested in the well being of our people. Well, now let's talk. What does that mean? Do you mean all the people, or do you mean certain classes? Let me use a word that is there in a bad translation for Marx. But we are in a very primitive stage of history. History goes in all kinds of, as Engels said, zigzags, but also spirals. For a while we spiraled downhill. Now we are, I suppose, trying to spiral uphill again. Same in China. It's a dull debate. Is China capitalist? It is a fact that for a long period, the right gained ascendancy in the Communist Party. The neoliberals gained ascendancy. It is also true that Xi Jinping is a person of the left and that he has been trying to push a left agenda. But he is up against it. I mean, there are lots of people in China who oppose it, who want a closer relationship with the US, who believe in the neoliberal policy framework. I mean, he is also in a battle. It's not like sometimes when people say, oh, he's a dictator, I'm like, I wish he were a dictator, but he's not. There's no such thing as a pure dictator. He's fighting a battle inside China to establish Marxism. He revived Marxism by creating institutes of Marxism. Russia is a very complicated case because in Russia, if you look at all the parties Putin has been involved in or in alliance with, they all seem to have the word patriotic or somehow united Russia, Russia first, one Russia, patriotic Pole. These are the names of Putin's parties. In a sense, they are establishing, or he is trying to establish, the idea of Russia for the Russians, something like that. Not Russia for the oligarchs. Although, because the oligarchs have such a grip on that society during the period of the previous president Yeltsin and the early years of Putin as well, it's impossible to do anything without oligarchs. You can't this is not a second Russian revolution. Putin after 2000...
Are you speaking of the period when they allowed capitalism to come in and help perpetuate the Russian communist revolution?
Well, I mean, from 2007, Putin made a decisive break with the Europeans, when he went to Munich and said, no single master. And then you've seen Putin struggling to establish what the political line is inside Russia. It's not clear. 1 minute it's extreme nationalism. The next minute it's the BRICS and the global South and this, and they are also struggling for a political anchor. I mean, I think we are in a great period of changes in these countries, and the role of all of us is really to drive the changes in a direction, which is going to establish humanity in the planet, which is a socialist direction. That's our job. Marx said that communism is the actual movement of history. It's very important for people of the left to always track the actual movement of history, every piece of it. Yeah. So I think it's true that we are moving in a direction of sovereignty, of regionalism, of a demand for multilateralism. And we need to be there debating the merits of socialism. That's what we need to be doing. We can't leave it to somebody else. You understand? You are all required to be there, to be making the argument, not in a sectarian way, but in a helpful way. And I will say, I'm fed up with sectarianism. I've had it up to over here with sectarianism. I don't want to have the debates about Trotsky and Stalin, this completely of a different era. Now I want to debate what can be done in Burkina Faso today. How can we strengthen the alliance of Sahel states? What's the best political line for the AES? I don't need to go back to the 1920s, to find advice. I read Lenin and I read Marx and so on to teach me how to think better, but not for quotations, right? Not to fight their battles. Lenin never saw the alliance.
Somebody said about chapter 1 of Capital, they went on for page after page after page to explain that water is wet.
No, that's not true. It's an amazing chapter.
No, Capital, of course, but the point is to explain the struggle is what.
True, but we also have to explain what are the economic and political possibilities for the central belt of Africa today. You got to build from the concrete into the abstraction. And that has to be our role. We have to play an educative role. We have to play a role. I mean, the kind of incubators that Liz knows very well. I mean, what was Brecht Forum? It was an incubator of thinking, Liz. Yeah, where you had debate and discussion to advance new thinking. We need a lot more of that today. We don't need, I would say, we don't need answers as much as we need better formulated questions.
It might be a ridiculous question. Going back to Maduro, he is pursued because he imported drug. How could he have imported drug? He did not live in the States. He could have exported drug, but not imported.
Well, about 2 years ago, that's a very, very funny question. 2 years ago, when the story came out from the United States that Venezuela is a drug exporting country, I did the stupid thing as a reporter of downloading the last 10 years of the annual reports of the Drug Enforcement Agency. Because the DEA, which is tasked with protecting US citizens from narcotics, actually keeps pretty good records because, they are supposed to be a professional scientific part of the DEA, the record keeping part. So I, plowed my way through, and of course I used, the find engine with reports before 10 years, but I did honestly read at least 5 or 6 of the year's reports all the way through. In none of the reports, none of them, did they mention Venezuela as a cocaine exporting country. It's very true that Colombia is a cocaine exporting country. It's also established in the DEA reports that most of the Colombian cocaine goes from the Pacific coastline, goes up to eventually the Pacific coast of Mexico, where it's then transshipped by various means into the United States. A small amount goes into the Caribbean, but most of that is consumed in the Caribbean islands. Okay. Secondly, it is true that when Colombian military forces pursue the drug paramilitaries in Colombia, there's one province in Venezuela, Barinas, the province of Hugo Chavez, where the drug traffickers cross the border into Venezuela, stash the cocaine, and go back to Colombia. Then, when things cool down, they go back and collect their dope. So there is cocaine in Venezuela, but basically as a warehouse in that one province, the border province. The border is extremely volatile area of Colombia and Venezuela. So the United States government says there's no drugs coming from Venezuela. That's number one. If I was making the case for Nicholas, I would start there. Secondly, United States government accused Maduro of being the leader of the Cartel de los Soles. So Cartel de los Soles is interesting, the cartel of the sun. Before Hugo Chavez won an election, in a small town outside Caracas, a military general, this is in the previous period, under the previous constitution, a military general was arrested and indicted of drug trafficking, and some of his subordinates were also involved. Now, interestingly, in the uniform, they wore, in the epaulette, there was a sun, there was the soul. So a journalist from that town named them the Cartel of the Suns as a way to journalistically describe this group. But there is no Cartel of the Sun. So for years, this phrase used to be laughed about in Venezuela. Oh, I'm a member of the Cartel de los Soles. It doesn't exist. Okay? So in the indictment, it said initially that he was the leader of the Cartel of the Suns, which is a made-up term by a journalist. Then it says that he's the leader of the Tren de Aragua gang. Now, the Tren de Aragua gang is a gang created in the prisons of Venezuela when Maduro was the president. It was in the prisons, not in the presidential palace. Most of this gang, then the leadership apparently escaped from jail and left the country. And the main guy is wanted, including where I'm talking to you from. I live in Santiago in Chile. He's wanted in Chile as well because of, part of the cocaine smuggling into Chile. So he's wanted in a number of countries. Nobody has found him. But he's the leader of the gang, and the Venezuelans want him. He's wanted in Venezuela. So how is it that then Maduro is the head of the gang? It's particularly, and there's no evidence of personal gain by Maduro from drug trafficking. That would have to be part of an indictment. You'd have to show that, in the Panama Papers, his name or his son's name was why. There is no evidence that's unsealed. Maybe there's sealed evidence. Can't comment on that. There's no public evidence. So the whole thing is ridiculous. And I don't know what's in sealed evidence, and I don't know everything, but I've known Maduro for a while. I've been to his house. He's not, if he were a drug dealer, he is your most unusual drug dealer. What he is a working class guy who did not want to be president. When Chavez told him in Cuba, when Chavez was dying of cancer, and told him, Nicholas, you're going to have to take over. It can't be, Ariaza, it can't be these other people. We need to have somebody who comes out of the working class struggle to be the president after me. I was a military guy. Can't have somebody from a middle class background. It has to be you. You were a bus driver. You were the leader of the bus drive. It's got to be you. He wept and begged Chavez not to make him do this. He said, nobody's going to take me seriously. I'm coming after you. Firstly, you're not going to die. Like we always say to people we love, you're never going to die. But he was dying of cancer. And then he said to him, I can't do it. I mean, how am I going to take over after you? And indeed, that's true. People didn't take him seriously. So much of the left outside Venezuela was like, oh, he's making this mistake, that he's not Chavez. I mean, yes, that's true. Guess what, guys? He's not Chavez. Chavez died. Somebody had to take over. This guy didn't want the job, yeah, but he took it. And then what happens when he comes in? Oil prices collapse, and Obama takes the opportunity in 2015 to tighten the screws on Venezuela. I mean, the pandemic hits. They are not allowed to even use their own IMF money to buy drugs and syringes for the pandemic. And then the Bank of London seizes their gold. They're not allowed to even use their own money in Western banks. I mean, this guy had the toughest assignment. I mean, the reason I sent him a box of books, some biographies and so on, was, you deserve to lie down and read and relax, because, man, it's not been easy from 2013 to 2025. You think he wanted to run again for the presidency in 2024? I was in the room with him. He was done, man, exhausted, but he knew it was his responsibility, that they had to win the election again, that they couldn't afford to have a rollback from the right wing, and he did his responsibility. Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. The charge sheet is beyond ridiculous. Reading it, I thought first, it just can't be written by a human. It's so dumb. One of the charges against Nicolas Maduro is possession of weapons. So what? If I'm in Venezuela and I had a tank in my backyard, the Venezuelan government could charge me, but not the Southern District of New York. Like, what's the jurisdiction of the Southern District of New York with my weapons possession in Venezuela? Like, maybe it's illegal, but not for. I mean, let's be pretty honest here. We're talking about the Southern District of New York. Cyrus Vance Jr. refused to prosecute Harvey Weinstein when all those cases came before him. Yeah, he refused to. I mean, that court should not have. We should not be taking either the Southern District of New York seriously or Miami-Dade seriously. Yeah, I'm rereading this brilliant book by Julie Brown, Perversions of Justice, about the Jeffrey Epstein case. The most important part in this book is Acosta's deal, sweetheart deal. Yeah, 30 cases of underage girls coming to the Miami cops and saying we were raped or we had, by this guy in a house in Miami. And Acosta didn't prosecute. And then he becomes labor secretary under Trump. Yeah, I mean, that's the United States, guys. It's not, all these stories of who knew Epstein. I mean, yeah, the attorney there, the prosecutor, refused to prosecute 30 young girls. Not one, not two, 30 of them on the record. Women came on the record against Weinstein. And Cyrus Vance Jr. said, I'm not prosecuting the case. See Ronan Farrow's book, Catch and Kill. He details it in that book. Yeah, this is the same jurisdiction that's going to try Maduro. Ridiculous. Unserious. The United States, unserious. Not serious people. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes, I want to ask about Mexico, since I'm from Mexico. From my perspective, I think we are in a very difficult situation with the United States. I would really like my government to work more with other countries such as China, the group from the BRICS, but it's not easy because we have the United States close to us and we have this history with them, no? All the land that they stole from us, and I could say that the cartels in Mexico are a design of the CIA. So it's not easy. We have to deal with that. So what's your opinion, your perspective about this? Because I think I am talking for millions of people in Mexico that would like to not be so close with the United States in our economy. So that's my question.
Well, firstly, I put in the chat a dossier that we wrote alongside Morena's International School of International Formation. Oh, sorry, School of Political Formation for their internal cadre. We wrote a text called Mexico and the Fourth Transformation. This was kind of prior to Claudia Scheinbaum. So we were looking at the AMLO years, really, and also trying to understand what the hell is this fourth transformation? Like, you keep talking about 40, 40, what do they mean? So it's actually an interesting place to start. I'm giving it to you and then I'll make some comments, but I very much hope that you all will get to read it. We'll take some time to study it. It's a very good text. We built it with one of the people who runs their school of political formation. Okay, so Mexico is in a tough situation. I mean, it's the old Porfirio Diaz line that you very well know: so close to God, so far from God, so close to the United States. That's a very familiar line. But I must say that despite that, the Morena project has been quite intelligent in how it's operated through and with the United States. You can't disentangle immediately. You can't disentangle from NAFTA Part 2 and re-engage with South America or Central America. You're entangled in a whole bunch of treaty obligations. Your economy is geared towards the United States. But I'll tell you something. 4 or 5 years ago, I was in Mexico City, and I had a very interesting conversation with somebody unnamed who said to me, one of the weapons that Mexico as a country has really not mobilized is the Mexican American population. And then this person gave the example of, the way in which Israel was able to mobilize the Jewish American population. Now, of course, that lobby is really not there as it once was. Yeah, the genocide has really created some fractures. But this person was saying to me, why can't the Mexican American population organize? These attacks on Mexico, nobody stands for Mexico inside the United States. Where's the Mexican American lobby? Or the Mexican American sections where in some districts, 60% of the vote, yeah, near the Texas border, or other places, 20%, of the vote, or the Salvadorian population in Los Angeles. Why can't the Mexican Americans and then the Latinos be mobilized? Obviously Latinos is far too complicated, but I took the Mexican American thing seriously. Latinos complicated because the class interests are varied. You're talking about Cubans and even the new Venezuelan migrants, very different politics. But Mexican Americans, Chicano population, why not consider this exactly on the lines you said? Hey, Arizona, whose land is that? And so on. Why is it that in voting in constituencies with large Mexican American populations, you have some of the most repulsive right-wing anti-immigrant people get elected? What's going on there? Is it poor stewardship by the party of the non-whites, the Democratic Party or whatever? Forget the Democratic Party. Why aren't Mexican Americans mobilizing? In fact, what's Morena doing in the United States? Why isn't Morena paying attention and interest in this population? Yeah, if the United States can interfere in the elections of Mexico, Why can't Mexico interfere in the elections of the United States? And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Again, thank you very much, Vijay. And we'll call it a day. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks a lot. Take very good care of yourselves. And remember that thing about health insurance. I'm waiting. Bye.